What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one, I'm going to be going over about 7 players that I think have a really high likelihood of busting this season. Busts are generally guys that we identify as going significantly above their ADP, and also guys that are going to be a real detriment to your team if you draft them and they don't hit. If you draft a guy in the 10th round and he doesn't pan out, who really cares? But if you're spending a third or fourth round draft pick on a guy and he ends up being a bust, then it really hurts your odds of making the playoffs. It's really difficult. If you drafted a guy like Najee Harris last season, you're probably not making the playoffs. If you drafted Kyle Pitts last season, you're probably not making the playoffs, etc. So it's almost just as important to identify busts as it is to identify those breakouts, because as much as it helps your team really well, if you draft a player in the 8th or ninth round, they end up performing really well, it hurts your team just as much almost if you draft a guy really high and doesn't perform. So it's important to identify these players with high risk profiles and then find a way to avoid them. So I love making these videos. I've actually found that these are guys that I'm pretty accurate with, so you can feel free to keep me accountable on that. You can go watch this video from last season. I was pretty good there, and feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on it here as well. So yeah, if there's anybody that you disagree with me on or any other bust that you feel like I don't touch on, let me know in the comments. I'd love to interact with you guys. But yeah, let's get into the video before we rant too long here. Starting us off here, I've got Lamar Jackson, pretty penciled in as a bust. He's going as the quarterback 5 right now, which for me is just way too high. He's finished outside the top 5 in points per game each of the last 3 seasons. Then he's been unable to stay healthy over the last 2, missing a total of 10 games over the last 2 seasons. And even health aside, in all my projections, I assume that each player is going to play 17 games. That's obviously what we're hoping for. So, assuming Lamar plays a full slate of 17 games this season, I still don't truly believe that the Ravens have fixed their wide receiver core. I've talked about this before, but Odell Beckham, I don't think is going to fix anything. He's old, coming off a second torn ACL. It's just unlikely to me that he actually performs admirably. I like Rashad Bateman, but he's still dealing with an injury that kept him out towards a lot of last season. And Zay Flowers is a rookie. It's really difficult, especially for a guy that I don't think many people have Zay Flowers penciled in as one of the top 3 receivers in this class. I think most people would say that it was a pretty clear number 1 in JSN, and then Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson were sort of the 1 or 2 and 3 after that. So Zay Flowers for me is not an elite wide receiver prospect, and he's still a rookie, so I don't expect him to be super meaningful this season. On top of that, the Ravens have made it pretty clear that they want to be a more pass-heavy offense this season, and to me, that's actually a negative for Lamar. Lamar's posted that MVP form season, that season where he was just the most valuable quarterback in fantasy as well, because he really just broke the mold as a rushing quarterback. We saw him also put up 30 passing touchdowns in a season where he ran for over 1,000 yards and put up like 10 rushing touchdowns as well. And if he's not running as much as we've seen him in the past, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Ravens as a franchise to do that. They've seen Lamar get banged up. They want to limit the amount of opportunities for him to get hurt, and that's why they've tried to go out and get these good wide receivers, try and get an offensive coordinator that's going to help facilitate a better passing offense. And I just don't know if Lamar's capable of being a very efficient, high volume passer. So I think what we're going to see is they're going to try to pass a little bit more. They're going to limit those designed running opportunities. So we're going to see a bit of a lower rushing threshold. I still have Lamar Jackson projected for the second most rushing yards at the quarterback position this season, just behind Justin Fields. And it just doesn't project very well for him. I don't think he's going to put up a very elite season from a passing standpoint as well. Like I said, I don't think his weapons are that great. So the way I have it projected for him, I project him to be the quarterback 10 over the course of the season. But with the way Lamar plays, I think it's going to be really dependent on maybe a big play here or there, a big run that really gets him those spike weeks. So Lamar's going to be a guy, he'll probably have a couple weeks this season where he might even be the quarterback 1. But I think there's also going to be a lot of weeks where you don't see this offense play very well. They're going to have a really good defense. They're going to run the ball well with J.K. Dobbins. They're not going to need to air it out 35 times a game, and they're not going to need Lamar Jackson to run for 100 yards a game either. So I think it's going to be a pretty boom or bust for Lamar, and I don't think the ceiling is really all as high as people are giving him credit for. So I expect a down year for him, and I just don't think he's worth a draft pick right now. Next up, I've got Dameon Pierce. He's a guy that I've sort of talked poorly on already this offseason, but I wanted to bring him up again. The Texans have a projected win total of 6.5 wins this season. To me, that feels high. I'd be surprised if they got to 6.5 or 7. So I think that this is going to be a team that is obviously going to lose a lot of games, and in general, it's really difficult for running backs on teams that lose a lot of games to be very fantasy relevant. You generally see these guys be much better in games that they're winning because then the team can run the ball, run clock, and also generally if they're winning, they're probably going up against a lesser opponent, and that's going to allow them to run the ball better as well. So on top of that, rookie quarterbacks tend to not very often support high-end offenses. I think the only real notable outlier of late has been Justin Herbert, and that's really about it. It's very rare that you see a high-end offense captained by a rookie quarterback, so it's just not something that we can project here. In addition to that, Devin Singletary was brought in from Buffalo. He's going to offer significantly more competition for touches in the running back room than any of the competition Pierce had last season. I do believe that Dameon Pierce is a better player than Devin Singletary, and I'm projecting him to get more touches as well. But last season, Dameon Pierce finished as the running back 20 in points per game, which puts him as like a low-end running back 2. That's also where he's being drafted this season. And last season, he had the 6th highest opportunity share among running backs in the league. That opportunity share is percentage of team touches that were, or percentage of running back touches that went to him. That's just a very high figure. You only see guys like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs last season, and other guys like that beat that figure. And the only reason Dameon Pierce had that high of an opportunity share is because there was just no competition around him. We are going to see him cede touches to Devin Singletary, so he's going to have a much lower opportunity share. I think he can put up about the same level of efficiency. He averaged 4.3 yards per carry. I'm projecting him for 4.4 this season. So I think he's going to be fine. And from a talent standpoint, it's just that he's going to be splitting touches in a bad offense. There's not very many touchdown opportunities. And that means that the goal line role that I do expect him to hold isn't as valuable because there just aren't that many rushing touchdown opportunities here. So the way it's staying out for me, I've got him projected as my running back 37, and I tried pretty hard to put him in above guys. There's guys like Antonio Gibson there. There's Jerick McKinnon. These are guys that are going way later than Dameon Pierce that I do have ranked higher, and I stand by that. So, and it just makes sense. Running backs in timeshares that are on bad offenses, they're not going to put up very many fantasy points because they're going to split touches. You're not going to get reliable receptions. And on top of that, he's not going to score very often. So I like the talent quite a bit, but I just don't think it's going to work out for this year in fantasy for Dameon Pierce. Up next, I wanted to talk about a guy that I haven't really brought up very much this offseason, and that's Najee Harris. And I think a lot of us can agree that Najee Harris really hasn't been the most efficient running back so far in his career. He's averaged below 4 yards per carry in both of the first 2 seasons in his career. That's very bad, obviously. I think a lot of people want to chalk that up to the offensive line, and maybe that's part of that just true. The offensive line has been something that the Steelers addressed this offseason. Maybe it's a little bit better, but with that being said, Jaylen Warren put up much better numbers on a per-touch basis last season. He's, to me, a much better player in the open field, and I think he's going to be a player that really poses a legitimate threat to Najee Harris's firm grasp on a 3-down roll. I expect that Jaylen Warren to get the 3rd down work and the 2-minute drill offense this season, and that's going to be a big hit to Najee Harris. You're going to see those receiving numbers go down quite a bit. In the one season where Najee Harris posted top 5 numbers, he had about 70 receptions from Big Ben. That's not going to happen this season. And despite looking better in the second half of last season, Najee still only averaged 4.1 yards per carry, and that's after people want to say that he was healthy. So I think it's fair to say that's about his ceiling. I'm actually projecting him for 4.2 yards per carry, which I think is pretty generous. And despite that looking better second half of last season, the real reason his fantasy numbers improved was just because of the touchdown numbers. Up through week 10, he only had 3 total touchdowns in the season, and from week 10 on, he scored 8. So that played a very large role in his ability to put up fantasy points in the second half of last season. I don't think this is going to be a Steelers offense that's very dynamic at all, so I would expect there to be limited touchdown opportunities. Najee Harris is still a good enough player that he does have double-digit touchdown upside, but you're not going to see 15 touchdowns of the guy, and I wouldn't be shocked if he had a down year at like 5. And on top of that, I think Najee Harris is going to get enough volume his way to running back 2 numbers, but he's being drafted as running back 12. My projections have him coming out as the running back 19, and I'm still projecting him to get 60% of the running back carries and split receptions and targets with Jaylen Warren. So if Jaylen Warren makes it closer to a 50-50 timeshare, then this is just a disaster for Najee. He'd be, again, sort of that, not quite as bad as what I was talking about with Dameon Pierce, because I think the Steelers will be a better offense, but you find yourself again with the potential of having a guy who's in a timeshare on a bad offense, and if that's the case, that's just not going to work out really well for him. So I think bust might be a little bit too harsh for him, but I just don't see a world where he really greatly exceeds his ADP, and there's certainly a world where Najee Harris falls quite a bit from where he gets drafted this season. Moving on to the first wide receiver bust here, I've got DEEBO Samuel. I think there's just plenty of uncertainty altogether with this situation. We don't really know who the quarterback in San Francisco is going to be in week 1. I still expect it to be Brock Purdy, but his best season really from fantasy, and really the only great season DEEBO Samuel's put up from a fantasy standpoint, is a season in which he was used in sort of a hybrid role and he put up 8 rushing touchdowns. That's just not the sort of role he's going to get this season with Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell healthy. Obviously, both these guys sort of have that injury-prone label, so I guess a world exists where we see McCaffrey or Elijah Mitchell go down and DEEBO finds his way into a more hybrid role again, but that's not something that I can project when I'm statting out players this season. And on top of that, Ayuk is the number 1 target in terms of target share in this offense. So you're really looking at a guy who is not really utilized downfield too much. A lot of his targets are close to the line of scrimmage. He gets a lot of screen passes and slants because of how explosive he is after the catch. And I don't think that he's going to be able to be so hyper efficient the way he was 2 years ago that he actually pays off in his ADP. In addition, we saw how much of a rapport Brock Purdy had with George Kittle. We saw George Kittle put up 7 touchdowns in a 4-game pace. So I think that in general, you're going to see a lot of the touchdowns in this offense go to Kittle, McCaffrey. Ayuk will score some. There's just not going to be. There's too many mouths to feed in this offense for any one player to really pay off at the wide receiver position that high. And DEEBO Samuel's being drafted as the wide receiver 18 right now. The way I have it statted out, I have him projected as the wide receiver 34, and I actually have that about 9 spots behind Brandon Ayuk. I'm projecting him to be a wide receiver 25 here. And it's just because there isn't really a single player in this offense that's actually necessary to that offense. They have so many talented players, and there's only so many players that can put up 60 yards and a touchdown in any given week. So it's going to be really difficult for all of these guys to eat every single week. I think DEEBO Samuel's got a real shot to find himself as the odd man out. And obviously, he's a really talented player. He's going to have some spike performances. He'll have a couple of games where he catches a screen pass and houses it for 60 yards, and then he'll be great that week. But I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be pretty frustrating because you're going to see him hit a lot of, I don't know, 4-catch, 50-yard games, and that's going to be it. And it's just going to be a little bit underwhelming. So I don't think DEEBO Samuel has a real shot of returning wide receiver 1 value, and I think there's certainly a scenario where you see him fall far below that wide receiver 18 price tag, so I'm avoiding him everywhere this season. So my next wide receiver bust here is actually Jaxon Smith-NJIGBA, and I think I'm going to get a lot of heat for this one, and don't get me wrong, I really do think JSN's a really great prospect. He's going to have a really great NFL career, but Lockett and Metcalf are also really elite wide receivers in the NFL. And on top of that, the Seahawks really don't have a great history of incorporating rookie wide receivers into their offenses very quickly. Put up a couple examples of receiving totals that we've seen out of notable rookie wide receivers in the Seahawks offense in the past. We've got Golden Tate with only 21 receptions. Baldwin and Lockett each put up 51 in their rookie season, and DK Metcalf put up 58. And I'm projecting Jaxon Smith-NJIGBA for 66 targets or 66 receptions this season on a very generous, to me, 18% target share. I still have him projected as the third target in this offense, and I don't think that's wrong, even by the way the market's judging things. JSN is the third wide receiver off the board from this offense, and on top of that, these receptions for JSN are going to come out of the slot. We're going to see Lockett and DK Metcalf on the outside. That means that the targets that JSN's getting are not going to be very far downfield. You're going to have a limited yards per catch unless JSN can do a ton with the ball in open space, and he's good enough to do some there, but he's not a real explosive after the catch guy. So I think that we're going to see a pretty high catch rate out of JSN, but not too many yards per target. And on top of that, JSN is just going to be the third highest targeted player in this offense. So for JSN to really pay off at this ADP, you would need Geno to take a huge step forward. You'd need him to throw for like 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. And I just don't really see that happening this season. I'm projecting Geno for a really similar season to last season, something like 4,300 yards and 32 total touchdowns. And that's good enough to make Lockett and Metcalf a pretty good duo, but with JSN sort of being the odd man out there, I have stats him out as my wide receiver 59, despite an ADP of wide receiver 34. And maybe JSN makes me eat crow here. Maybe he does just take a step forward super quick. Maybe he's better than Lockett and Metcalf, and then I'm wrong here. But there will be one wide receiver on the Seahawks offense that is a disappointment for sure. And just given that I think he's the least proven, he's not going to be as acclimated quite yet, I think JSN is going to be the guy that disappoints this season. And for my one tight end bust here, as much as it pains me to do it, I've got to put Kyle Pitts here. He's in the same bad situation as he was last season. There's really nothing that's changed from last year to this year. They've maybe upgraded going from Marcus Mariota to Desmond Ridder. I personally think it's lateral, if not a downgrade. They've got probably an even more dominant running game, given that their offensive line should be more just as good as it was last season, and they've drafted Bijan Robinson, arguably the best running back prospect to come into the league in the last 10 years. So it's very reasonable to assume that this is going to be a team that's going to be extremely run heavy, and they already were last season. They had the second highest run rate in the NFL. I'm projecting them to have the highest rush rate in the NFL this season. And on top of that, Pitts is not going to be the only talented wide receiver on this offense. I get it, I'm calling Kyle Pitts a wide receiver because he effectively is for this offense. He and Drake London are both really talented players. Drake London's going to probably get targeted even more than Kyle Pitts this season, so in reality, you're drafting, if you draft Kyle Pitts, the number 2 target on a really crappy offense that's going to run the ball a ton. So you're just going to have a really limited opportunity here for Kyle Pitts to gather many targets. So you need Kyle Pitts to put up just a extremely efficient season here. And on top of that, Kyle Pitts still hasn't really proven that he can score touchdowns at this level. We know that he only had 1 this rookie season. I believe he had 0 last season, though don't quote me on that. And Drake London's been a guy who's been really dominant in the red zone in college and has shown already that he can score in the red zone in the NFL. Bijan Robinson's going to be a focal point for this team in the red zone. Desmond Ritter's mobile enough that he can be a threat near the goal line as well. So I think Kyle Pitts is going to have a hard time really outproducing his ADP because I don't see a world where he puts up a spiked touchdown season, and there just aren't enough targets to go around in this offense for him to be a truly dominant difference maker with maybe 100 targets this season. So as much as I love the talent, I think he's going to have a really great NFL career still. I just don't think it happens this year, and it's just going to be this time next year is probably going to be the time to start buying Kyle Pitts in Dynasty, would be my guess. So I've got him. I've done everything I can in my projections to pump him up. At first, he initially came out as my tight end 17. Obviously, would take him much higher than that, but after adjusting things as much as I can, I've gotten him up to my tight end 12. Honestly, I think that's about right. He's going to be a guy that'll have a couple spike weeks because he's super athletic and can be efficient, but the volume's not going to be there. He's probably going to underperform that ADP of tight end 5, and I just don't see any real upside beyond that tight end ADP of 5. So avoid Kyle Pitts this season. Just let someone else step on that landmine. So that'll do it for my bust video this season. I'll probably do one more when we get closer towards more into draft season. I'll probably revisit these in August. I'll touch on probably these same 7 guys and see if I still feel that way. Maybe I'll try and throw a couple names in there as well. Up next, I'll bring you guys a couple sleepers. I'll try and touch on 5 to 10 guys that are going really late in drafts that they could be real difference makers for you this season. So that's always a fun video. You got to dive pretty deep and get into some guys that try and pull out some guys that you guys haven't really heard of much. So yeah, really love making these videos. We're going to be putting out several more a week throughout the rest of the off season. If you like this video and want more content like this, please do follow or subscribe to the channel. You can click the bell so you get notifications when more videos come out. And if you like this video, which I hope you did because you made it this far, please do take a minute to like the video. It really helps with the algorithm and really helps us grow the channel. Right now we're at like 340 subscribers, and I've got a ridiculous goal of hitting 1,000 by the end of the season. So help me out. Let's see if we can get there. And yeah, thank you very much, and I'll catch you next time.